Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, 2 Star Wars movies a year now? That's what they're talking about, and that's what we're going to be talking about right now.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for the show. And Ronaldo's already joining us, so that's good. You know, it's always good when we have everybody right from the beginning of the show. So, I don't know, man. 2 movies every year. That's what they're talking about now.
Yeah. That would be exciting. There's a lot of content that needs to get out, so I could.
Yeah. No, and I definitely agree with that. I think that there's quite a bit they could do, actually, when it comes to this. But I don't know. I mean, let's start out by saying this. So, from the standpoint of them doing 2 movies a year, because remember, in the beginning, and this is a big problem with what they were doing, is first they go, okay, we're going to release a movie every year, right? So that was the first thing they were going to do. Then they decide, hey, you know, it's not going so well. So now we're not going to release pretty much anything in between, because what the plan originally was is that every other year we would get, you know, something from the Skywalker saga, for instance, right? That was really what they were trying to do, was give us something from, you know, the Skywalker saga, and then they would alternate that with basically a standalone film. And that was really what their whole trip was. That was what they were going for. Now, since they've been backing off of that, there's been these rumors. And again, you know, we usually tell you guys, look, we don't usually try to bring rumors to you, but, I mean, if it's worthy of a discussion, we're going to bring it out there. So, again, this is not a confirmed thing. This isn't something that is set in stone, but there has been a lot of talk, and usually we wait. You know, if it's just like 1 or 2 sites or whatever, we're not going to bring that to you. We're not going to sit there and say, hey, guys, this is what's happening. But this has been happening on more than one site.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, different, there's a lot of different sites that have pretty much been kind of saying the same thing. Yeah. Rogue One, that's kind of the next movie which is kind of a surprise, quite honestly. You know, even when we first heard about it, we're kind of like, okay, this is different. But I'm anxious to see, you know, what's up with. And that's going to be directed by Patty Jenkins, who also directed Wonder Woman. But then there's, and it's out that, that's the only one that we know of. Because technically, Taika Waititi's project, and then it's supposed to have a whole trilogy of stuff. So that has yet to be discussed. So it really kind of, out there where you're kind of like, okay. And then, there's still some Kevin Feige rumors out there, although I think he kind of just, if I recall correctly, he kind of did, but you never know. So, there's a lot going on in the Star Wars universe. I mean, of course, we always talk about the TV, but, we always talk about Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Acolyte, there's Andor. There's a lot of things as well. And then now it seems like the cinematic universe is getting filled up once again, too. So, it presents an interesting time for Star Wars.
Yep.
Before, talking to you, about the days, in the past where the original trilogy, how you guys had to wait for everything. Like you have to wait like 2 years, 2 or 3 years. It's all this content now between books, comics, shows, now movies, so Star Wars is kind of exploded, and you just kind of have to kind of play the.
Yeah, so, and Ronaldo pointed this out. I was going to point this out too. Your audio's cutting in and out a little. I have a feeling the internet might be having some issues in your location. Unfortunately, we've been hit with a lot of storms in this area, and You know, it really
Yeah,
wouldn't
definitely.
surprise me if maybe that was doing something too, because unfortunately, again, anybody that's been a longtime viewer of the show knows that we actually usually are in a studio and, you know, we're streaming out from a single location and everything else. But unfortunately, while we're revamping the studio, because we've had to change locations and it's just taking us a lot longer to get a new studio going, we've been doing it from the respective homes. So that means Wi-Fi. That means there could be some issues, especially with all the storms that have been going on. I lost my internet a couple of days completely, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, it is a good thing that it wasn't during any of the storms, you know. But let me get this thing
Yeah.
from, you know, if it keeps getting bad or whatever, maybe what we'll do is I'll take over for a sec. You can restart your computer and, you know, maybe that'll fix it. I
Okay.
don't know. Well, let's just see how it goes. Maybe it'll stabilize. But Ronaldo brings up, he says, are we counting the Rian Johnson trilogy? So it's funny that you bring this whole thing up because as you can see in this wonderful little graphic that we have here, that's one of the things that I want to deal with, because obviously we could have announced this, you know, and just said, they're going to do 2 movies a year and then just moved on to something else. But what I wanted to do tonight is I want to talk a little bit about, if they're going to do these 2 movies a year, what are their possibilities? What are their options? Because that's a lot. Even doing 1 movie per year would have been kind of a, well, I don't really want to say it's a stretch, because certainly they can, you know, they can come up with all this stuff. But just basically from what they have in the pipeline, what could we possibly expect from, I guess, Lucasfilm, Disney, whatever, as far as how are they going to get all this content? So Ronaldo brings up the Rian Johnson trilogy, and that's one of the things we'll go through. We'll go through Taika Waititi's movies. There's a Patty Jenkins film, obviously, where she's got Rogue Squadron. There's the Kevin Feige movie. That's basically the ones that we've had pictured. But there's been all kinds of rumors out there, and the thing is that they're all in various stages. And as we know, one of the things that's happened that I think is actually exciting, and we alluded to this a little bit on Monday's show, where we talked about the fact that you have mostly a television-centric focus that Lucasfilm is doing now. They seem to be moving a little bit away from the films and going more towards all these Disney Plus series. But that could change. Now it's like no sooner do we actually report that than they come out with this whole thing about, you know, oh, now we might be doing 2 movies a year, which is really, considering that Solo, they considered it a box office failure. It's interesting that they don't just go back to their yearly schedule. Now, my question for you, Darryl, is do you think that that's because, we'll see what your audio does, do you think that that's because they now feel that they have enough content from all these directors that if you were to try to just do 1 movie a year, there's no way you would be able to get all this stuff? You know, you don't want to go into a case to where you're alternating films and say the 3rd film of Rian Johnson's trilogy isn't like, you know, it's 10 years after the first one. What do you think?
I mean, that's a good ability. You know, I think it just depends on when they choose to release, and who, you know, like, do you off, because, you know, the saga, that's the films. However, you know, standalone movies are a lot easier to produce, you know, and they can stand on their own. So if you have like a Taika Waititi film, if you have a Patty, you know, those things just be one and dones. Versus while you take more time and make sure you have your trilogy or your saga film well put together, because that's what, you know, people are not, you know, that's how people really identify with Star Wars, are the saga films.
Yeah. And I agree. And I agree that the saga films is the main thing that, you know, you're going to focus on. The saga films is obviously the main thing. It's going to be probably what would be the highest concentration. But I don't think that we're talking about a 10, 11, and 12 at this point. You know, so it's almost like, what are they going to do now? If they do go to this 2-movie-a-year schedule, it almost makes you wonder how they're going to break that up. Because first of all, even though, let's just take the Rian Johnson trilogy, for instance. Because, and I got a couple of thoughts on this too. You have the Rian Johnson trilogy that's been out there. Now, it hasn't been canceled. There hasn't been anything where Lucasfilm has talked about canceling the film, right? There's been a lot of fan speculation that after The Last Jedi and the divide that it caused and all the toxicity in the fan base, that there's no way that they would let Rian Johnson near the Star Wars franchise ever again. Now, what I pointed out, excuse me, is that you have a situation where they may not let him near the main characters ever again, but if he comes up with his own thing, then there's nothing that the fans would necessarily have to get upset about. Still a good filmmaker. So when it comes to the Rian Johnson trilogy, what are your thoughts? I mean, I'll go into the rest of what I was going to do, but I want to catch your thoughts really quick on, and then I'll get to a couple of Ronaldo's chats. What do you think that, one, the Rian Johnson trilogy could focus on, and do you think it's still happening?
Well, the Rian Johnson project, I mean, there were some initial thoughts on that. Of course, people thought Old Republic at first. Now people are thinking even or considering High Republic. This could be the High Republic start. It could be the build of that. And, you know, that's a whole world that, you know, now that we have books and comics and things like that to kind of support that whole venture, and it's still new. You know, that's a direction that he could go. And I could see him doing it because with some of the characters, you know, he's done darker stuff. That's one of the reasons why we thought he was going to do well with Last Jedi. Right. Well, the High Republic has some dark, the Drengir, you know, that's a whole dark, creepy kind of thing. Oh, and I think that the Nile, you know, that, you know, I know some stuff with that. So, I mean, it's still kind of in his alley or his, you know, in his lane, you know, but I think that would probably be the direction, unless completely off from that. At that point, I have no idea, because especially if you're trying to do a trilogy, now you're basically saying that this is a whole storyline that's going to continue, almost like he becomes a new George Lucas in a way. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of gutsy if you really think about it, because, you know, from Star Wars came from the mind of George Lucas. So now the new wave of Star Wars is coming from the mind of Rian Johnson.
Yeah, well, and I mean, again, I agree. So, first of all, I totally agree that if Rian Johnson is going to take on anything that's familiar, and you're right, it's almost like, what are they going to do? Are they going to have him invent this whole new thing when they have all these things that they're building toward in the comics and the novels and all that? I think you're right. I don't really think that they're going to do that necessarily. I think that they're going to want everything to tie in to what they're building through the other platforms. The High Republic would actually be the perfect project for him, because, like you said, it has some of that darker element, and I can especially attest to this pretty much like close to halfway now through Into the Dark, or I think that's what it's called. It's either that or Into the Darkness, but I think it's Into the Dark. That's the second of the High Republic novels or whatever. I mean, they also have some young adult ones too, and they also have like the comic series that we're reading. They have another comic series too that's a little bit different, and I haven't tapped into that. But there does seem to be an overall dark overtone when it actually comes to a lot of these different characters, different storylines in the High Republic. So the High Republic, without question, would be something that would be completely worth giving to Rian Johnson. Now, Ronaldo, on the other hand, says, do you think all these movies are going to be connected? Because it doesn't seem like it. And I can understand what he's saying, because he goes on to say, you know, it feels like they're all individual projects. And then, unfortunately, he feels that Rian Johnson's trilogy is never going to happen. They just won't say it. Now, that could be. That no news could be bad news in this case. But if you think about it, if you look at what they're talking about with Rian Johnson's trilogy, it's almost the same as what they're saying about Taika Waititi, what they're saying about Kevin Feige. I mean, all these guys have basically have either stated themselves or it's been stated that they're going to have their own movies or their own trilogies or whatever. On the other hand, nothing has really been super confirmed either, but it also hasn't been denied. I would think that if the Rian Johnson trilogy were dead, that basically Kathleen Kennedy or somebody would have come out and said, look, this isn't happening. Rian Johnson himself even said that he's under the impression that this is happening. So I would think that even if they didn't come out publicly and say anything, behind closed doors they might, have told him, like, hey, man, we're not going to do your trilogy. Because he's still working on it. And it's one of those things that if they weren't going to do it, I don't think that Rian would say, oh, yeah, it's full steam ahead. It's a go. We're going to do it. If he knew that they weren't going to do it, I think he would have just sidestepped it. I think he would have played it a little bit coyly and said, well, you know how things go. I mean, he would have done something. But that's interesting.
Yeah,
the High Republic is that's a good subject for him to do.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I think he's still going to do it. But I think what they want to do is really make sure it's done well, because once again, like I said, you're talking about an investment. You have to remember, okay, if Taika Waititi does a movie and it's a one-off, like Solo, for example. Solo was one and done. All right, yeah, it didn't do all that well in the box office at first, but then now everybody loves it. Okay, cool. But Rogue One, another prime example, one and done. Great film. Everyone loved it. Yay. It's over with. Rian Johnson, the one person who was the most divisive in this whole sequel debacle, all right, you're giving him 3 movies. If the first one doesn't hit,
well,
how are you know what I'm saying? Like, okay,
I know,
because now you've already built up this whole thing for a trilogy. So it's just like, okay, either one or two things are going to happen. Either that's going to be a one and done and you're going to scrap the whole trilogy thing in itself, or you're going to, like, okay, let's say the first one does well, the second one falls flat. Now people once again are, you see what I'm saying? Like, I think they really need to make sure that his thing is really going to be rock solid. And I think that's why they're being so tight-lipped on it, because you have to.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second, because there's another reason why they could be playing tight-lipped on it. You see, you got to remember that Rian Johnson, oddly enough, was the only director that got no input, That's one of the reasons why we thought The Last Jedi was going to be this incredible, amazing film, is because he's the only director that Kathleen Kennedy never tried to micromanage.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much got to do what he wanted. He was never fired. He was never, nobody came in and did a bunch of second unit stuff for him. I mean, it was basically like, wow, they're pretty much leaving this guy alone to do what he knows he should do for these films. So I think it's based on that he's actually getting this trilogy. They're like, well, because remember, everybody was singing his praises and they all thought, yeah, this guy's the man. Let's give him a whole trilogy. Let's reward him for this. And then The Last Jedi comes out. And then everybody sees how it does. And then it's like, ooh, well, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. So, we'll have to see. Ronaldo basically says, before you get to that, because this kind of ties in, I think there's a little difference. Taika's and Patty's movies were announced in the Disney event, and we already know the writer for Kevin Feige's movie. And he goes on to finish that point by saying, but the only one talking about Ryan's trilogy is Rian himself, and it seems he's not even sure it's going to happen.
Well, to play
Devil's
the other
advocate.
devil. Yeah, the other devil.
The other devil.
To that point, though, so you said that he was the only one by Kathleen Kennedy who didn't receive any, flack. He pretty much had a go, and that's true, very true. However, he's also the only director who received a bunch of flack from the actor Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, who did not really approve of the way he was doing his character. So that's a telling side too. And as we got to see, he was right. So, you kind of have to look, you got to take that into consideration as well. And once again, his movie is the one that was like, okay, the first one, Force Awakens, everybody says derivative, but it overall liked it. It was like, okay, it just brought you back to Star Wars, but it was a little derivative. Okay, cool. The only problem we really had with Rise of Skywalker, really, for the most part, I mean, the whole Palpatine thing kind of cheapened it, and the fact that they did too much fan service. But I mean, overall, I mean, story-wise, I mean, it was a decent movie. No one had any real, true, major complaints about it. But that Last Jedi movie is the one that took everybody out of it, including Mark Hamill. And so now you're going to reward this guy with a trilogy of his own. Now, granted, I agree with you that, yes, as long as he stays away from main characters that we know, and he doesn't screw them up, because he can't screw those up. And he does, like, okay, if he, like, that's why I said the High Republic is really the place for him. The only problem is Yoda's in that world too. And if he screws with Yoda too much, fans are really going to want to burn him at the stake.
Well, but here's the thing. One of the coolest highlights of The Last Jedi was that Yoda Luke scene.
True.
And I mean, he handled that brilliantly. I mean, that was one of the things that I think that everybody, pretty much, even the haters, most people think that scene was done really well, and that he really captured the essence of Yoda, and that he pretty much captured the essence of what their relationship would be in this stage. I mean, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I think that was the best written scene, in the whole thing. But
yeah, and that's for that moment. Like I said, that was a snapshot in a movie, but like Yoda will be prevalent probably throughout the whole trilogy.
I don't agree with that, because so far Yoda hasn't really done squat in the High Republic. I mean, if you actually read the books and then read all the comics and all that stuff, from what we've been presented with so far, now that doesn't mean that later on he might not be, but so Ryan could pretty much go the same route, right? He could just basically pepper Yoda in there here and there if he wants, and just focus on the others.
And that's true. All I'm saying is that he's in that universe with more opportunity to mess it up. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think that. I mean, Yoda, in a lot of ways, I think is a little bit more defined, because first of all, he was dead. Secondly, I think that it's a little bit easier, and I think fans, okay, let's just say that, Jason joined us. Let's just say that you do have Yoda pretty prominently in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are going to be more forgiving if you screw up a backstory than they're going to be if you screw up where we go from here. Because that's where the problem with Luke was. Now, I don't know. I don't really think that he's going to screw. I mean, let's just say, of course, it's all speculation, right? Because we don't even know. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would make most sense if Rian Johnson's trilogy was a High Republic thing, and that would probably be the best thing for him, again, because it's darker material. It would be a little. It would lend itself a little bit more to his style of filmmaking.
His thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily get the vibe based on The Last Jedi that he would actually ruin Yoda's character, especially considering it's somewhat defined already.
I will hope not. But see, that's the problem. See, the problem is that Yoda, because of his age, and what we've seen, like, okay, well, even looking at The Mandalorian, right? At that time, even on The Mandalorian, he's 50. All right. So if you take a younger Yoda at 200 years old or something at that time, right, which is approximately where he is, I believe. Or
No.
no, no. I'm sorry. It just takes
No.
200 years
It's more like
before. So yeah,
700.
600. Yeah, so 700. Right. I'm just my fault. Anyway, so the fact that he's trying to have a younger Yoda, once again, he may be trying to do things differently with Yoda because it's like, okay, well, this was Yoda back then. The Yoda that you knew was wiser. And so maybe at that time, at 700, he wasn't, he was still wise, but he still had these things. All I'm saying is that in death, it's like, okay, you really can't do much because Yoda's Yoda at that point. I mean, he's already done his thing. He's gone.
No,
All
I
right.
agree.
So, of course, so George Lucas defined Yoda in the original trilogy and in the prequel trilogy. So we kind of know where he was throughout this major gap in time when he was pretty much, I guess you would say, at his zenith, if you will, or thereabouts. But you go on a couple of hundred years prior to, now you have more wiggle room to actually say, like, okay, well, this is what, because of the way that the Jedi Council was at the time, and the way the Jedi Order acted at that time, you could have Yoda do some things that people were like, I don't know, well, Yoda would have done that. Well, you have to think about it. This is 200 years before Phantom Menace, so you had time to correct it by the, you know what I'm saying? I could see him trying to do too much. That's my point. I could see him trying to do too much, just like he tried to do too much with Luke.
Well, I'm
because
gonna tell you why.
it's just the opposite effect.
I'm going to tell you the only reason why I disagree with this. Because normally I would be concerned too. Because you have to remember that, in a way, his hands would be tied because all these authors that are putting out all these books and comics have already worked out all the storylines, pretty much a lot of the character arcs, what they're doing, how they are, how they're behaving, all this backstory on these guys, so they can present all this material. And so, one, he would probably be forced to adhere to that. Secondly, he's going to be forced to adhere to that anyway because of the fact that if he did anything too outrageous, it would screw with what all the authors are doing with the books. And that's the main area where the High Republic lives. So
I feel you, and that's a very valid point. I think to once again, not playing devil's advocate, but to piggyback off you this time. See, I'm doing both roles today. What makes me, and it just dawned on me, what makes it a little bit easier for me to digest is the fact that Filoni's been named creative director over Star Wars, period. So it's got to funnel through him.
Right. It has to funnel through him. And also,
so if he approves some stuff, then it's like, okay.
Right. But the other element too, which piggybacks off of me, is the fact that you also have to look at Yoda's role thus far in the High Republic. He's essentially taken a sabbatical. Mm-hmm. He's taken a sabbatical to go teach kids or something. Right. So I don't know how much he's going to actually, now again, it could be because we don't really know what the whole story arc of the High Republic is. We know it's been worked out, but we don't know what it is. So maybe as things progress through the story, maybe we'll get some.
Okay, I'll let you go to the comments real quick.
Yeah, let me go to the comments real quick. So, because Jason's got a couple. He says, I think Ryan could do some cool stuff with Yoda. I don't think he is good at taking into account a backstory he didn't make, but he does interesting stuff with the characters for the future. Which, yeah, we'll have to see.
And that, okay.
There's a lot of planning in the High Republic era, so his writing would feel either contrived or it would disrupt the plans.
So to that point, and I'm glad Jason mentioned that. So it just once again dawned on me. So the High Republic, is a era that takes place but then I remember that's 200 years before Phantom Menace.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Acolyte bumps up right against the High Republic.
Yeah, it's like toward the end.
Towards the end of the High Republic era. So what if Ryan's trilogy sits between the Acolyte and Phantom Menace? That will be a way, because then now he won't be affecting the High Republic, but then you see what I'm saying? So now you kind of have your own little sandbox sandwiched in there right after the Acolyte has been released, that you can now then present your own trilogy. And so that way now you got freedom of characters, and now you do have a more seasoned Yoda.
Yeah,
and whoever else at that time.
Well, and because
he could be, and Ryan's thing could be post High Republic, because remember how we were saying that, like, in the High Republic, because we always want to see how did Yoda become the Grand Master, because he's not in the High Republic. In the High Republic era, he's not the guy, but in the Phantom Menace, he is. So maybe Ryan's point is right at that point where Yoda takes over, and maybe it's that transition where he starts to change the whole Jedi Order as far as how they do things, because as we've talked about in our reviews of the High Republic comics, the Jedi Order does not respond and is not acting like the traditional Jedi that we know. They're slightly different. And so maybe this is the point where Yoda steps in. It's like, okay, that was kind of like the old way. Let me kind of modify things a little bit for modern times, or I guess that work a little bit better, in my opinion. And maybe that's where Rian Johnson sits.
Well, I think that this is a reason why they're doing this whole Yoda's on a sabbatical teaching kids thing, because I think what's going to happen is either something really weird is going to happen to either the Republic or the Jedi themselves, or something maybe personally that causes him to actually, want to modify stuff. That's certainly possible. Or politically, but I would count that in with the Republic. I think that,
yeah, got you.
Because again, it's really hard to say. You would almost have to know where they're going with the High Republic story to really be able to button that down and to say definitively, yeah, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. However, it is a good point, though, that because there is, once again, kind of like what we saw with The Force Awakens, Last Jedi, like that period, there's this whole time period where you could take this character and say, hey, there's a couple hundred years. Well, we don't really know where the High Republic's going to end. That's the problem. We know it's about 250 years kind of in that era. But
we could have like 30 or 50 years before Phantom Menace.
Yeah, we don't really... I mean, it's like they're saying that it takes place a couple hundred years right now, but we don't know, because obviously we're in the middle, right? I mean, the era didn't start then.
Right.
So we don't really know. We know that that's around the time that the era actually is at its height. But I don't think, and anybody out there, whether you guys are watching live or in the comments, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if they said, okay, the High Republic era is between like 200 years before the Phantom Menace and 50 years before the Phantom Menace. It hasn't been really that clearly defined, at least anything that I've seen. Now, admittedly, I don't catch every little thing. I've been pretty good about keeping up with the stuff, but it's weird. I actually wouldn't mind seeing the Rian Johnson trilogy being that, because my other fear, it's not even so much Yoda. It's what would he do with, like, Avar Kriss, or, Skier, or, Greystorm, Loden Greystorm. It's like, what would he do with these guys? Because they're kind of defined in the books, especially, and in the comics too.
Well, yeah, I think you would, if you have defined characters, you probably would have to shoot them or play them close to that, But that's what I'm saying. Like, if you have a period of time where it's open, where these guys are no longer, because obviously, these guys Well, I won't say they're obviously gone. We just don't know where they are during the time of the Phantom Menace. I mean, they could still be around. We don't know.
Yeah, depending on their
So
lifespans. I mean, the problem that I see with the High Republic too is that they have created so many characters. You remember when we used to do that whole, okay, here's all the Padawans of the High Republic, here's all the Jedi, all that stuff. They haven't even gotten to all of them, right? Like, I'm into the second book. We've gone through like 8 or 9 issues of the comics. We still haven't gotten through the entire list yet. They were obviously giving us, in totality, here's a bunch of guys. Now, Ryan could do one of a couple of things. He could either weave in those storylines by not dealing with the characters that we've already met and invent new ones, but just have it be during that time period. So in other words, have it be somewhat complementary. The other option is, which to me is the better option, is I agree with you. I think that he should take whenever the High Republic ends, maybe even brush back against the Acolyte, kind of go between that and the Phantom Menace, like somewhere in there. And that could be interesting, because then if he finds out from the committee of authors and Filoni himself, like, okay, what's the deal with the High Republic? What's happening to it? When's it going to end? Get a lot of those details going. So that way he has something that he can work with in starting to pretty much establish what happens in between. Yeah. He could do his story, and he can do that without necessarily contradicting anything that might come up in the future, because again, that's the biggest problem that Star Wars has, is that as big as it is, instead of seeding out totally new characters, what they've done is they've overlapped things, which, don't get me wrong, I mean, that's cool. I love that. I mean, I really love this whole War of the Bounty Hunters series that's out. I mean, there's the actual War of the Bounty Hunters comic, and then they'll take like the Darth Vader comic, the Aphra comic, all these comics that'll have War of the Bounty Hunter headlines over them, and it's how the stories basically overlap and interweave into the main War of the Bounty Hunter storyline. And it's cool. I mean, they got Vader facing off against Kira from Solo, and how basically like what happened to Han Solo's body when Boba Fett took it. He ends up losing it. Then the Black Sun is back. Crimson Dawn's, of course, back, and they're auctioning it. I mean, it's a really, really cool storyline. But the problem with all that is you run the risk of, once again, what happened to Legends. You paint yourself into a corner. Let me just sneak in this one from Ronaldo here. Ronaldo says, Ryan seems like someone who knows Star Wars lore, in my opinion. So if he works with the High Republic, I think he would become knowledgeable about it. I guess that depends on who you ask. Is he knowledgeable? Yes. The problem, though, is he kind of has his own spin on the whole thing.
Right.
When you look at The Last Jedi, he had some very definitive ideas. Now, I don't disagree with a lot of them. Like, for instance, the whole grumpy Luke thing. I actually thought it was cool that he was disillusioned.
Yeah.
My problem, though, is that he stayed that way. And the way that they had his story arc from then on, I mean, even though he did kind of come back to be somewhat the hero, he was never what we expected him to be. And I think that he could have done this little, okay, I'm a little bit disillusioned, the Jedi way is a failure, whatever. Maybe go through a little bit of a period like that, but then come back from that. And then become the Luke Skywalker that, pretty much he should have been.
Yeah, and I think that's what fans wanted to see. That's why we got that in the Mandalorian season 2 finale. We got that release. So it was like, okay, this is the Luke Skywalker that we wanted to see, that we never got. And so that was like Favreau and Filoni's way of kind of like righting that wrong for us, which we do appreciate immensely, because that short moment was just amazing. Astounding. But I think, yeah. And once again, I think that, yeah, Ryan told a good story with Luke. I think it was cool. And honestly, like, I wish they would have kind of put that into Force Awakens. Honestly, I wish they would have put it like that part in Force Awakens. So then by the Last Jedi, he might still be grumpy, but then like, okay, halfway he kind of realizes, yeah, this is wrong. Trains Rey. They both, do their thing, and then okay, now they storm the Force. They take out the First Order or whatever. Maybe Luke sacrifices himself for Rey, and then it goes off. And that would have been more of a, I think that would have been more of a justifiable ending for, one of the greatest heroes. But we got what we got.
Well, and Jason points out, kind of like what we were talking about, that he did come back from his delusions. It's really more disillusion. At the end of The Last Jedi and during Rise of Skywalker, I almost said Revenge of the Sith. Rise of Skywalker, he acted like a Jedi, in my opinion. And he did. I mean, but the problem was he was dead.
Yeah.
He was a Force ghost.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, he acted like a Jedi. Who cares? He's dead.
Yeah, he's not.
See, that's my problem. It's not what it should have been. He should not have stayed as disillusioned as he was for as long as he was. I mean, even Mark Hamill, you're talking about the end of The Mandalorian. Nobody was happier than Mark Hamill because Mark Hamill himself was kind of, now granted, before everybody gets off on that bandwagon too, Mark Hamill has some pretty out there stupid ideas that he himself admitted, like, well, maybe it is good that they didn't always listen to me.
Yeah.
But I think he was right on, though, about his character in The Last Jedi.
Well, I also think that, to your point, yes, we got the Luke being a Jedi, once again, after he's posthumous at this point. But what I felt like we got was a rehash of Obi-Wan in a way from A New Hope. That's basically what we got. Just Obi-Wan wasn't, disillusioned, but he was just at a point where he couldn't, he always kept saying, I'm too old for this, and Luke was at a point where he wasn't too old, but it was just like, he was so disillusioned. But then by the time, we got to see the Luke that we wanted, he was gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Jason even points out, I can agree with that. It was selfish for Ryan to put Luke's death scene in his movie instead of saving it for the finale, which is another good one, or letting him live. And that was thank you, because that was the other point that I actually meant to make, was that if you want to kill him off, fine, but do it at the end of, episode 9. Now, Ronaldo says, I think Luke's last act before dying was the most Jedi thing ever. And
absolutely.
Of course it was. It was great. But the thing is that, and I mean, let's be honest, it was a really, really cool new Force power too. I mean,
definitely.
If you want to show that Luke is the guy and he's a grandmaster in the Force, that was a pretty crazy way of demonstrating. And I remember if we didn't actually do a show on it, I know we spent a lot of time, I think when we were going over Force powers or something like that, because a lot of people actually underrate that particular thing. Like they don't seem to understand just how incredible of a display of the Force that actually was.
Well, yeah, and just to kind of briefly recap that thing, I mean, I still take myself back to that moment in the theater because, I mean, it totally fooled me, quite honestly. Because I honestly thought that, like, okay, the whole time Luke decided, like, you know what, I need to get back in here. I don't know where he, I thought he just took a lightsaber and cut his hair or something like that and trimmed himself up. Now, I don't know where he would have gotten that.
Creatures or whatever, kind of like give him a
porgs
makeover
or something. Yeah, little porgs makeover or something like that. Now, where he would have gotten the hair dye from, that should have been my first clue. But I mean, I was so caught up with the fact that Luke showed up that I didn't really think about that part. I mean, I noticed the hair was different, but I didn't notice the color was different. But then the other thing, of course, too, is like the fact that he's not making any footprints. That was the other clue. Like, you're on this whole salt planet and everybody's making like red footprints, but except for him. So that should have been the clue. But the fact that he's like, okay, not only did he show up,
actually,
he's actually interacting with people.
Well, and I want you to take this because you're describing the Force power. So Jason says, how do you know that it is a difficult power? Luke is the only one who has ever done it. That would actually be my first clue. I mean, you got all these guys. Luke's the only one that's ever done it. That's number one. But because I know you're getting into, how cool it was, and you want to kind of recap what it actually, what the deal is.
Yeah,
I just wanted to include that comment in there for you.
I appreciate it. But, you got to think about, like, this man is way on the other side. I mean, he at least is we could say he's on another planet. We know that for sure. Now, how far these planets are, that's irrelevant. The fact that you're on a completely different planet. Vader and all these guys would have to use, like, holograms and stuff like that, or, to send communications to people. This guy actually used the Force to project his likeness across the galaxy. And then it was actually interacting with people. And I can understand if only Leia could see him, that would be one thing, because one, they're brother and sister, and of course she has the Force as well. That would make sense. But the fact that Poe and everybody else could look and see, like, is that Luke? Yeah, that's Luke Skywalker. Oh my, like, how do you recreate that type of image across the galaxy that everybody can witness you, even though you're not there and they don't have the Force to that degree?
Well, and Jason kind of says you're using that power to demonstrate how powerful Luke is, and Luke using it to demonstrate how powerful the Force power is.
Right.
Kind of. Not really, though, because if you think about it, it's almost like a linear progression of things. Vader was obviously, and everybody points this out, and it's been basically stated that one of the things that Vader did, right, if you look at it from the standpoint of the Force choke. So we've seen a lot of people do Force choking. But Vader could actually Force choke people from across, because he's able to manipulate the Force basically like across the galaxy in a sense.
Right.
Which is kind of a heavy use of it. It's kind of like when you're talking about like this Force astral projection thing, and I get it, because actually, if you really want to be hyper technical about it, Luke really isn't the first person that we saw use it. Yoda kind of used it in the Clone Wars series, or maybe it was Rebels. It was Rebels because it was Ezra.
Yeah, but he was already, he was dead already.
Not in Rebels, because that takes place before episode 4 and 5.
Right.
So, I mean, he did. But see, the difference, though, is that when you talked about the interaction, when he was able to physically hand Leia something and she was able to touch him, there was a lot of manifesting going on there that we hadn't seen. Because Jason's going to point out, too, Sidious Force choked Dooku from across the galaxy. Vader was one ship over. Some of you are talking about Admiral Ozzel. Admiral Ozzel's one point, but I'm also including some canonical things like in the Lords of the Sith book and stuff like that. Like, I'm not going into Legends, because if you go into Legends, then you get into like these really weird Force powers. Like people moving planets and, crazy things like that. And again, I think that what Rian Johnson was trying to do was he was trying to show Luke's extreme power in the Force without getting silly with it.
Right.
And that was another thing that I actually appreciated about The Last Jedi, because the Legends books, although it was really cool to read it, you're kind of going, wow, dude, that's that's pretty extreme. And it stands to reason, because you also have to remember, like, look, guys, the bottom line is Anakin or Vader is the son of the Force. Luke is the grandson of the Force. It's not really too much of a stretch that these guys are going to be able to do things that other Force users can't even do. In fact, there was an article today where I forgot who picked up on it, but it was some interview where they were talking about that in the prequel era, Vader, when Anakin became Vader, could have taken out Yoda. Even Yoda wasn't powerful enough to take him out. Which I could see that, which is why I had always thought that it was weird. Even though I guess if it's down to who's going to take out the Emperor, Yoda's the only one that has a chance. I remember when, we were talking about the whole thing with Obi-Wan, where Obi-Wan's, well, let me take the Emperor and you go take Anakin because I don't know if I could kill him. And Yoda's just like, nah, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that every time that Obi-Wan went against Dooku, he was like taken out in like 2 minutes and Anakin had to finish the fight.
Right. But I mean, when you look at the point, of going to the point of like, okay, would Anakin be able to take out Yoda? Yes, if he was trained enough. Yes.
That was that was like the latest Lucasfilm story thing that they were saying. It wasn't even about that. It was just that he could do it. I thought that was kind of strange.
Well, okay.
But
I'll go back. I mean, that's what they say. That's what they say. They're the ones with the keys. But I would just say back to the original point, though, of, Luke, his whole astral projection thing. I mean, you have to really think about, like, just look how difficult it is for like a novice just to lift rocks, right? And you're just like, okay, lifting rocks and organizing them and placing them in, like, it takes considerable strength at that stage. So to get to the point where you can then beam yourself or your likeness across the galaxy and create a living, almost like a living embodiment of yourself, to the fact that people can interact with you. Like you said, people can touch you. You can hand, Leia Han's little dice. People who don't have the Force can actually witness you. And then you go out there and another Force user can't even discern. And he's pretty powerful too. Let's not forget how powerful Kylo is. Kylo couldn't even tell the fact that it wasn't Luke. Why couldn't he sense that in the Force, that wasn't Luke? It was that believable that it was Luke Skywalker.
Oh, I
because otherwise,
I never even thought of
why
that.
Why would you even keep fighting him if you know it's not him? Crap, that's your uncle. Yet and of course you can't say he's not using the Force because he's fueled with rage, which empowers the dark side anyway. And then he realizes once he sticks the saber through him and he realizes, oh, that's not really Luke. And it's just like, yeah, gotcha. So it's like, yeah, that's an immense show of power.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you just kind of look at it, but I think, again, to play devil's advocate for a second, I think the point that Jason makes, though, is legitimate in the sense of we're assuming that Luke is the only one that's used it because that's the only one we've seen use it. So it's one of those things that, it's almost like how difficult is it for him to do? Now, for me, I would say the fact that we've only seen him use it, I mean, granted, if we're going to be real here and remove ourselves from the in-universe explanations, it's obviously because nobody's really thought about it. And, this universe is being developed. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is really cool about it, but it's also a weakness of it. It's going to go back to an earlier point I was trying to make, where when you start playing too much in this little sandbox, you run the risk of continuity issues. Or if you start going too far before, say, episode 4, you have to start explaining things like, well, how come R2-D2 never used his little jet things and flew in the original trilogy?
He ran out of propane.
I mean, and of course, you gotta love these guys. They come up with these in-universe explanations like, well, it's because he got his jets or something got damaged or something. And I'm laughing because I'm like, guys, he got blown to crap in episode 4. Like, when they pulled him out of that X-Wing, he was all burnt to a crisp and completely, like, destroyed practically. And they rebuilt him. Now, what all the really heavy duty fanboys, and I think even the story group had said this too, is when they rebuilt him after that scene, they rebuilt him without the jet stuff, without the little, propulsion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, cool. I mean, what else are you going to say? I mean, the reality is it's 1977 and they didn't have that technology.
They didn't even think about it at that time.
Yeah, and he didn't even think about it at that time. Exactly. I mean, what else are you going to...
Right.
Really, I mean, from there, what else are you going to say? And Jason earlier had talked about if, they were trying not to get silly with it, then to him, they kind of failed with that Grandmaster, that whole astral projection type of a thing or whatever. Ronaldo thought that the R2 thing was a bit dumb too. And you're going to run into these problems because that's just, it's the nature of the franchise. As technology moves on, it's almost the same problem they're experiencing with Star Trek, because I was watching Discovery. I still haven't finished the 3rd season of it. But the problem that they were having is, they have all this beautiful tech and all this stuff, and it's like, great. Now, how are you going to explain how you go to like the 1960s show after this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same problem that you have as technology has moved on and you're making all these series. If they take place before episode 4, you have to somewhat explain why it doesn't look as nice, which I thought they did a great job when they said, well, during the prequel era, it was a more regal time and all this stuff. By the Empire, you had this fascist government in charge. Everything's like war-torn and it's, kind of dirty and everything. And that's a great explanation. But you can't explain everything that neatly. And that's the problem. So, that probably covers the Rian Johnson thing. Remember, we're only through 1 of 4 of these guys. So, Jason also says, also during the prequel era, the focus is on more wealthy characters. And that's another good point. That's another good point. In fact, let me get that one up there. Because that is another thing, besides the time period being a little bit more elegant and stuff, that yes, they're definitely focusing on more of the nobility class, the people that are in charge, things like that. And they do show some of the, the tattooing stuff where people are slaves and all that stuff. And they're not really living in a great thing.
Environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even with like I said, we only talked about Rian Johnson's films, but even if you go to the other 3, really, like, there's really not much you can really say, because once again, you don't know what time period or where you're going to go. Because let's just say if Ryan takes the High Republic era, okay, well, that leaves so many different areas. And like I said, it could be, bounty hunter movies. I could see Taika Waititi doing a bounty hunter movie or something like that.
Well, let's before we get to him, let's just move to Kevin Feige, only because Ronaldo had made a point a little bit earlier. He said, by the way, have you seen the Loki series? Because the same writer will work on Kevin Feige's movies. That was actually something that I remember reading in passing, but I had actually forgotten that fact. So, yes, I have seen Loki. I don't know, have you seen Loki?
Not yet.
Okay. It's cool. It really takes on this weird thing in the Loki. What they've been doing through WandaVision, little bit through Falcon and Winter Soldier, and especially through Loki, is they're introducing the whole Phase 4 thing in the Marvel Universe where they start dealing with the multiverse. That's what it's all going to be about. Or at least it's going to be the main focal point. So it's true, with very little information, and because these guys haven't really made Star Wars per se. See, we could spend a lot of time on Rian Johnson because of the whole Last Jedi and all this stuff. So that's why I wanted to do him first, because I knew that, quite frankly, the bulk of our show was going to be the Rian Johnson speculation. But, we could spend a little bit of time on this. Where do you think the Kevin Feige movie would go, if you had to guess? You're just like,
Honestly,
I got nothing, man.
I mean, yeah, I mean, because it's kind of like, because I just don't feel like there's enough source material. I mean, unless you wanted to, I don't know, like if he wanted to do like a Luke Skywalker, like adventure of, like, okay, what was he like post Return of the Jedi or something like that? And they had that one, the one guy that they got to play Luke in the season finale of Mandalorian. Maybe that. You could take it.
Well, I do think with
I
all
don't know. I
these
mean,
people,
it's so much. I mean,
well,
it's not a whole lot that you can that we know of
I know,
source material. So I mean, it would just be him
I know,
creating.
it is basically complete speculation,
Yeah.
and that's part of the fun of of doing it. Plus, we also have people chatting in, so that kind of helps. Maybe because Ronaldo says I got nothing either. Maybe High Republic or before episode 9. I mean, and it's true because with some of these, like really, if you take just these 4 people, the Rian Johnson thing would probably be about the easiest thing to guess. But we don't even really know Rian Johnson either. We just started focusing on the High Republic because it would make the most sense if he was going to do anything to do that. For Kevin Feige, it would make the most sense to me for him to focus on what I would like to see Feige focus on is a lot of these criminal organizations, your Black Suns, your Crimson Dawns, the Hutts, maybe kind of like a bounty hunter gangster type film. And again, this is also now assuming, other than Rian Johnson, we're assuming a one and done for these guys. We're not assuming a trilogy for them.
Right.
So a one and done for Kevin Feige, that's where I would like to see him put his efforts. So now with that, do you got does that help you at all, or are you still like,
I mean, like I said,
still got nothing?
I mean, I could see that. I mean, I could see him going that route. Something tells me the period of, I feel like his period may be like after Mandalorian, before Force Awakens.
Well,
somewhere in there.
But the reason why I say that is because this War of the Bounty Hunter comic really changes a lot of things. I mean, I cannot stress enough that if you're I'm going to go this far and say this. If you're a Star Wars fan, you need to read that series because it's canon and it is heavily talking about some just really cool things that are happening in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I think that with what I was saying, it could take place during that time period. Because I agree. I think that what they need to do is they need to get into that time period between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. That really does need to start to be explored because we have a little bit about what's going on before, and now we have a little bit about what's going on after. That's pretty much of a glaring thing. And that's like 30 years. That's 11 more years than what's been going on between episodes 3 and 4. Ronaldo basically says, but what about the Old Republic? I mean, they already announced a remake. What he's talking about is they basically announced that they're going to remake the Knights of the Old Republic game for the PlayStation 5. They're going to completely redesign it from the ground up. It's going to be a complete redesign. I think it's going to be the same story, but they're going to completely redo everything.
And that's one I could see. I mean, I remember Benioff and Weiss was kind of rumored or speculated to be the ones who were going to do that film, or do that series. I could see Taika Waititi doing that.
I was going to say that. Once we had moved on from Feige, which, I mean, we could pretty much do, that's exactly what I was going to say. Taika would be the perfect person to me if Well, I mean, Benioff and Weiss would have really been the perfect people to do it, but I think Taika is the perfect person to do it because if you look at the Knights of the Old Republic game, there's a lot of comedy in that.
Yeah, it's a lot of humor, a lot of dark humor.
A lot of humor, yep.
He's already done stuff with Mandalorian, so he's already directed some stuff, so he's kind of familiar with that kind of style. And like I said, by them redoing the game, I could see that them upgrading it, and I could see him doing the movie to accompany that.
Well, and this is a good time to talk about as well the fact that I think that Lucasfilm definitely has a plan, and I don't know how firm it is. And you know me, I'm very hesitant to say that Lucasfilm has anything remotely near a plan, but it does seem like the War of the Bounty Hunter comic series, the Book of Boba Fett TV series, The Mandalorian, they're going to be launching. It's almost like they're launching this little, I don't know, like assault almost, right? Like they've got different chunks of a greater story arc. That we're no longer really looking at this stuff as just individual pieces of content. Which, of course, they've been doing for years with the books and the comics and stuff like that, and how they would tie into the movies. And, Ronaldo kind of supports that. He says, well, maybe Taika is actually replacing Benioff and Weiss. I wouldn't doubt it, because I don't think that it's an accident. I mean, granted, don't get me wrong. The Knights of the Old Republic was an insanely popular game for good reason. So it is possible that because they're starting to rebuild the Star Wars presence in the gaming front, because, they've also been talking about Jedi Fallen Order 2, which, by the way, I don't know, I just kind of put that in there like on one of the previous shows, but because the PlayStation Store did have a sale, I ended up getting both Fallen Order and the Rogue Squadron game. Both of them very cool. Insanely good graphics on both. And they're joining Battlefront 2 and, just some of the other games that are really, really good, have good story content, and I think are moving the franchise forward. But what's interesting to me is how they're tying in a lot of the TV series that they're coming out with some of the comics and the novels and now even some of the movies. And so I think they're now finally doing what they really should have been doing from the very beginning. Now, even though the High Republic is kind of standing on its own a little bit, it also, with its comics and its books and things like that, it's been tying in on the bigger picture as well. So Ronaldo says, well, they have a plan, 100% sure. We've seen how much Lucasfilm cares about public opinion with what they did with Episode 9. Well, and this brings up a good point, too, and I'm sure eventually we're going to do another show on it when it becomes a little bit more relevant. But there does seem to be a little bit of a disarray with Lucasfilm itself. I mean, I don't know if I would go as far as to say a civil war, but you could definitely say that the Kathleen Kennedy side is fighting with the Favreau-Filoni side. And, you read these articles every once in a while where it's talking about, Kathleen Kennedy is trying to get in on Filoni's thing. And, I mean, it's just insanity. It really is crazy. But I think overall, though, and of course Ronaldo says, look, whether we like the plan or not, we'll just have to see. And that's true.
That's very true.
And so our final director up there is Patty Jenkins. Now, I think that we have an idea of where that's going to go because she's already slated to do Rogue Squadron.
Yeah, that's already been slated, and she's already started working on it. Basically, we're just going to follow these pilots as they go through, the tests and trials. It's almost like Top Gun meets Star Wars in a way, I guess. And we're going to see, those adventures. And I think that's cool because, Rogue Squadron has always been one of those games, even back in the 90s, back on with Super Nintendo, that, I've always wanted to play. And, I only had a couple of times of playing it because I've always loved, the fighter pilot games and stuff like that.
Oh man, you'd love the Rogue Squadron game they got out now.
Yeah, I definitely got to check that out. But yeah, I just think that that would be a cool thing, just because once again you're in the Star Wars world, but you're not dealing with the Jedi and Sith. You're kind of dealing with the greater community, as far as like, okay, how, once again, like how we talked about the Mandalorian, how things are affecting everybody else. And you can see how, like, okay, this particular, group of people, what they believe is almost kind of like the Bad Batch. Like, how are they taking everything in? And, I'm really excited to see that, especially now that, like I said, we're, like a lot of technology has happened. Like we saw what they were doing, like with even the reimagining of the attack on the Death Star, right, from A New Hope. That was cool, just the way they reshot that, and that was years ago. And then when you see the stuff from the fight scenes from Force Awakens, was really cool.
Yep.
So now I'm really interested to see Rogue Squadron.
Right, and Ronaldo says he thinks that it's set before Episode 9, but it's not. That's the thing that's kind of interesting to me, is it's actually set after Episode 9.
Mm-hmm.
Which was an announcement that I really was surprised about. I thought for sure that it was going to take place before. I actually thought it was going to be in between 6 and 7.
Me too.
Yeah, that was my thought on it. But apparently it isn't. Which, of course, brings up another possibility, too, that they could have some of these movies, whether it's Feige or Taika Waititi or any of these guys, they could actually start to make stories that do take place after Episode 9. But to me, they'd have to be really careful about that.
Absolutely.
And I honestly, we'll see what happens with Rogue Squadron, but I would really much rather they put their focus on in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. That's where I actually think that they should be concentrating most of their time. And then, of course, Ronaldo's like, after? Man, now they have my attention. And exactly. And that's why, and I'm not really sure why they're doing that, unless they're trying to move the Star Wars franchise forward instead of patching up holes, going, this one takes place in between Episode 4 and 5, and just kind of keeping everything contained. Because the problem is, if you decide that, you want to focus on what some other race or species is doing during that time period, they could, because another thing that we never really talked about was they could be doing something with Thrawn. They could focus on the Chiss and what's going on outside of the known space, and they're going into the unknown regions and stuff like that where they are, because like I said, it's
the future of Star Wars.
Yeah, we did a whole show on that, right? Where the future of Star Wars is Thrawn and what's going on. They could do that. Which, if they start to focus on, if they start to keep going back and try to go in between, this episode and this episode, I would almost rather they do something like that with Thrawn rather than some of this other stuff. Even though, as I've said a million times, as a fan, I really do love when they focus on these things, because, man,
it makes the most sense for them to go to Thrawn, especially when you're bringing up Thrawn and the Mandalorian, and now it's going to be in the Ahsoka series. So then that would be a great launching point for them now to bring Thrawn to the big screen.
Sure. Once again, it's tying in everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ronaldo basically says, well, if Patty has a good story to tell, whether it's set before or after Episode 9, doesn't matter as long as it's good.
I'm with you, buddy.
I'm with you, but I have to say, though, I have to add this point. I'm on board with that as long as they don't screw up future storytelling in Star Wars. Because that was one of the things that when world building and, evolving of the storyline from a more macro point of view works, like say in The Bad Batch, it can really enhance the overall story. But if it goes the other way, it's like it could actually paint future storytellers into a corner, and then you've destroyed the entire thing. That's why they kind of had to do a reboot after the Yuuzhan Vong thing, because they did this whole 22 episode, or not episode, but book series, and then it's like, well, great, now what do we do? Because it forced writers to either have to go afterward, which was really far removed from the Star Wars that everybody loved, or they had to try to tell stories that happened beforehand. Because in the Yuuzhan Vong story, the entire galaxy was just like a mess. They were all embroiled in it. It wasn't like you can go, well, you know, while that's going on, we're talking about this. It's like, everybody was involved. So you do have to be careful. But I mean, from that standpoint, you know, we'll just have to, I think we're just going to have to wait and see. You know, it's kind of like what you had said before. I mean, we don't really know. But if they do, you know, just to wrap things up, though, on the original point here, if we do get 2 Star Wars movies every year, I would have to say one of two things is going to happen. Either they have to, you know, they have to have these guys make more than one film, or they're just going to bring in a bunch of other directors to, you know, do these one-off movies. Kind of like what they could do, and this is what I would support. They do almost like what they do in Marvel, where you have the phases, right? And you have, like, the Avengers movies are kind of like the anchor movies. So you have all these standalones that converge into this one single storyline. And then you go to the next phase with a bunch of other standalone films that converge into this next storyline. So you use the Avengers to kind of cap off the stories and springboard the next phase. So it's ending one phase and beginning another. Now, of course, they cheated a little bit because they actually had the 2 Avenger movies with Infinity Wars and Endgame, but really you can look at those as one single story arc.
Right.
So let me just get this last thing in here from Ronaldo. He says, do you think we will see sequel characters in Patty's movies like Rey or Finn? And he goes on to say, a year ago I would have said never, but with the actors saying they would like to come back, I think there's a possibility.
Possibly.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think just yet, though.
Not right away. And I'm not so sure because you can't have it both ways, right? I mean, on one hand, it almost seems like they're trying to do a soft reboot of the sequel trilogy. If they do that, you need to stay far away from those characters. And the other thing is, if you bring those characters in, as much as I think a lot of people legitimately like the characters, they just didn't like how they were used in the, you know, the movies and stuff like that. I think it might give fans a little bit of a bad taste, like, great, there's Rey. You know, here comes Finn. Oh, great, here comes... And especially if you're Rian Johnson, don't put him in. Rian Johnson needs to do the High Republic, right? He needs to be as far away from that era as possible. I'd even support him doing the Old Republic, but I think the High Republic, I think, is where he would probably shine. So, I mean, I think that if we get 2 movies a year, that's great. And I'm going to echo a little bit of what Ronaldo likes to say a lot, and that is, as long as we get a good story, then they could give me 3 movies a year.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's, yeah, if as long as you give a good story and as long as it's planned properly and well thought out.
Yeah.
You know, of course, who doesn't love more Star Wars? When it's done right. I'll put it that way.
Exactly. Now, Jason says, addressing the question posed in the title, I don't really want 2 Star Wars movies every year. Star Wars just feels too sacred to me to have 2 movies every year. And then he goes on to say, it's not a superhero story, it's a mythic hero story. I have to say that I actually kind of agree with this point. because as much as it's almost like when you see Star Wars, it's so cool, you want more. You know, I mean, it happens every time, especially when you're like me and you were there from the beginning. As soon as the credits come up on that episode, you want the next one.
Uh-huh.
That's why I think that the episodic nature of the saga films, while it works really well in movies, I think that the films are a little bit sacred. But TV, that's where it can live on. That's where you can get your Star Wars fix. That's when you can get that weekly, and when one series ends, another series comes up. I think that that would be more, if you're going to saturate the market with Star Wars, I think TV is where it needs to go. I know I just said that if, as long as the stories are good, whatever, and I mean that, because if they actually come up with really seriously high-quality Star Wars films, then why not have 2 a year? On the other hand, kind of like what Jason's saying, though, they're kind of sacred, and it's something that it almost dilutes it in a way. It used to be that when you would get one every 3 years, it was a big deal. It was special. It's like, man, new Star Wars films coming out, and everybody's lining up and going crazy. If they're coming out, like every 6 months, maybe it's not as special as it was. What do you think?
I would say that I would agree with that point only if you were talking about a saga film or if you're dealing with stuff that's continuous. Like Rogue One leads into episode 4. Okay, yes, I can understand that point, but Solo is perfectly fine. Solo, I think, if you do a movie that has nothing to do with a main storyline, right now we don't have a saga. So right now it's wide open to do all these standalone films and tell a bunch of stories that don't have to have any continuity to. It could take place within the time period or expand upon a time period without being a part of a saga. And I think when he says a mythic hero's journey, yes, that's true. When it's Luke Skywalker, but when you got, a couple of pilots flying around, it's Top Gun. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just the way I kind of look at it.
No, and Jason says, I had to put it up there for you. Good points, Darryl. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you know what they could do? I think I've said this before, too. They could use a film that, like, say, Solo, because that's a perfect example. Because it's not as standalone as everybody thinks it is, because it starts launching off the whole Crimson Dawn story, which is, trust me, it's a pretty big story arc when you really get into it. But what they could do is, you have a movie like Solo. You kind of introduce those elements. You have a standalone adventure, but you're introducing some things. You can then seed that out into a series if you want to expand on it. So now you keep the movies kind of as a sacred thing. But as far as what you were saying, I'm going to echo Jason here and say those are really good points, is right. I mean, it's kind of like if you have, and especially if you start going with my idea where you do different genre films in the Star Wars universe, well, then who cares? If you got Top Gun here and you got this movie there, and I mean, you see more than 2 movies a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if every 6 months you had a really good Star Wars film that was kind of a one and done, it didn't set up a huge story or anything like that, that could work. All right, well, I think that that's going to wrap it up for tonight. Now, we haven't really, did we talk about what we were doing Monday? I don't remember at this point.
Yes.
Oh, what are we doing?
We did talk about
I kind of
letting reflect.
You're right. Yeah, we sent a couple of texts back and forth. See that, guys? I mean, this is why I have a co-host, by the way. Because if I had to remember this stuff, I wouldn't know.
Changing Boba Fett's appearance.
Yes, the change of Boba Fett's appearance. That's a big one. So I'm really going to be curious. So warm up your chatting, typing fingers for that one. And, while I'm actually closing out the show and everything, I will say that if you like this show, don't forget to hit that like button because it really does help the channel. And hit that subscribe button so you guys, and of course the notification bell, so you guys know when we're going to come out with our next episode. We stream every Monday and Friday at 8, of course, unless something weird happens. But generally, we're pretty much on schedule every Monday, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, every Friday, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And we got a lot of really great things that we can talk about because it seems like everything is happening. I mean, we're sending each other articles almost every day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot happening in Star Wars. There's no shortage of stuff to talk about. So, Monday, we're going to talk about the change of Boba Fett's appearance. So, be sure you join us right here Monday night at 8 o'clock. With that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.